Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Government Operations and Fiscal Policy. I'm going to say day because we have a session this morning and we're going to have one this afternoon as well. This morning, we're going to review the Office of Legislative Oversight's report on public campaign financing and then look at Bill 2024, our public campaign financing amendments. I just want to first say thank you to our Office of Legislative Oversight for their excellent in-depth report. And I know we have one of the authors of the report here, and the other is unfortunately had a pre-existing arrangement, Ms. Rubin, so she was not here with us, but want to thank both of you for the report. And for me, I think having an OLO report with the background research and the foundation before we start to talk about a bill and amending our existing laws is one of the best ways we can do our legislative process. So I'm looking forward to digging into that. Just kind of to set the stage for us, as we know when we talk about our public financing system, we have a number of goals that are in place. You know, we are looking at encouraging a wider range of candidates to run for elected office, to limit the power of special interest, and to put a focus on voter engagement and policy rather than fundraising. We've had our public financing system in place now for a couple of cycles, and I think this is an excellent time for us to take a look at it, see what's working, compare us to other jurisdictions, and then see how we can move forward. So I'm looking forward to today. I have my colleagues here on Government Operations and Fiscal Policy, and we are joined by Councilmember Glass, I think, to talk about the bill that we will talk about in a moment. Turn to my colleagues. Any opening remarks? Mm-hmm. Nope. So we will turn it over to the Office of Legislative Oversight to walk through the report for us.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Blaise DeFazio, and I'm with the Office of Legislative Oversight. I appreciate the opportunity to brief the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee on OLO Report 2024-16, which describes the county's campaign finance program. And like you mentioned, Leslie Rubin, she worked extensively on this project, can't be here today, unfortunately. So we appreciate the cooperation we received from the Department of Finance, the Office of the County Attorney, and the Office of Consumer Protection. Today I'm going to begin this presentation with an overview of the election law and campaign finance, followed by how the county's public election fund operates. Then I'll present our analysis of the fund's participation and matching contributions data. I will then take a look at comparative information from other jurisdictions, point out some key findings, and wrap up with OLO's recommendations. I will start with an overview of election law and campaign finance. Election laws exist at the federal, state, and local levels. They regulate all parts of election processes, including voter eligibility and registration, candidate eligibility, the process for holding elections, and campaign finance. Campaign finance laws set out rules that candidates must follow when raising and spending money for a political campaign, like who can contribute and reporting requirements. Now to transition from talking about the laws to talking about the programs. Public campaign finance programs are designed to reduce the amount of money in political campaigns by providing public funding for qualifying candidates. Programs are strictly voluntary. Candidates who participate agree to additional restrictions on campaign fundraising and spending compared to traditionally funded candidates who follow a jurisdiction's basic campaign finance laws. 14 states and 26 local jurisdictions have public campaign finance programs. Three primary types of public campaign finance programs have emerged in the United States. Small dollar matching programs, which is what we have in Montgomery County, matching private contributions raised by candidates with public funds. Block grant programs provide qualifying candidates with a lump sum of money to conduct a campaign. Some programs are a combination of matching funds and block grants, including Baltimore City's and Washington, D.C.'s. And voucher programs give monetary vouchers to residents for them to give to qualifying candidates. The candidates can then turn in the vouchers to the jurisdictions in exchange for funds for campaign purposes. Seattle is the only jurisdiction in the country with a voucher program. In Maryland, elections at the state and local level are primarily governed by state law. In 2013, the state passed a law allowing local jurisdictions to establish public campaign finance programs for candidates for local executive and legislative branch offices. State law requires that the program be jointly implemented by the Maryland State Board of Elections and the local jurisdiction. 3 jurisdictions have already held elections using public financing, and 3 more will use it for the first time in the 2026 elections. Now I'm going to talk about the county's Public Election Fund program and how it works. I will sometimes refer to it as the PEF. As I said before, the county's program is jointly implemented by the Maryland State Board of Elections and Montgomery County. State law sets parameters for county programs, but the type and structure of program is left up to the county. State law requires the county to establish requirements that a candidate must meet to be certified to receive public campaign funds. However, the State Board of Elections reviews information submitted by candidates and determines whether candidates have met the requirements in county law. Montgomery County adopted a law in 2014 to establish the county's public campaign finance program. It's a small donor matching program. Candidates participate in the program in the 2018 and 2022 elections. The PEF is overseen by the Department of Finance, and the Office of Consumer Protection has a liaison who provides information to candidates and the public who have questions. To qualify to receive public funding in the PEF, candidates must raise a minimum number of contributions from county residents. The contributions must total a minimum amount, and the largest contribution that candidates can accept is $250. For comparison, traditionally funded candidates in Maryland can receive contributions up to $6,000 per donor. Publicly funded candidates cannot make contributions for businesses, organizations, political action committees, or labor unions. This table shows the minimum number of contributions and minimum dollar amounts that candidates must meet to qualify for public funding. The law establishes different minimums for candidates for executive, for at-large council members, and for district council members. If a candidate meets those minimum requirements, the State Board of Elections certifies them to be able to receive public funds from the program. The Public Election Fund is a matching program. The county will match the first $150 of a contribution with public funds to multiply the impact of the contribution. The formula that the county established to match contributions is a progressive formula, with more matching funds provided for the first $50 of a contribution than for the second $50 and the third $50. As we give examples from Montgomery County's law in the rest of this presentation, the examples will be related to the county executive candidates. This table shows the matching formulas. For a county executive candidate, what this table shows is that for the first $50 of a contribution, the county will match each contributed dollar with $6 in county funds. For the second $50, the county will match a 4-to-1 ratio, and the third $50 at a 2-to-1 ratio. The county does not match contributed dollars over $150. This table shows the matching formula at work for a county executive candidate. For example, a contribution of $50 is matched with $300 in public funds. A contribution of $150 is matched with $600 in public funds, with each subsequent $50 increment matched at a lower rate. Now we'll go over our analysis of the fund's participation and matching contributions data. For distribution of funds to certified candidates, candidates can only receive maximum amounts of $750,000 for county executive, $250,000 for county council at large, and $125,000 for council district. The maximum amount is per election. A candidate can receive up to that amount in the primary election and in the general election if they move on. For distribution of funds, certified candidates can only receive maximum amounts of $750,000 for county executive, $250,000. Oh, I'm sorry. This one got mixed up. I apologize. One of my slides got mixed up right here. Okay. So let's see. So $5.3 million was distributed to 23 candidates in 2018, and $3.7 million was distributed to 20 candidates in 2022. With the last council appropriation for FY25, there's currently $4.6 million in PEF for the 2026 election cycle to date. For public election fund participation, in 2018 there were 5 open seats. 40 out of the 69 total candidates sought public funding. 23 of those 40 candidates ended up certified, receiving funds. For 2022, with 6 open seats, 30 out of 65 total candidates sought public funding. 20 of those 40 candidates were certified, receiving funds. Now I'm going to present comparative information from other jurisdictions. 6 Maryland jurisdictions have or are developing public campaign finance programs. Montgomery County was the first jurisdiction in the state to develop a public campaign finance program. The other jurisdictions have based their programs on Montgomery County's, with some differences between the programs. The top 3 in the table use public financing in the 2022 elections. The bottom 3 will use it for the first time in the 2026 elections. There's a lot of information in this table, and now I want to highlight a few items. First, this table shows information related to executive candidates only in each jurisdiction. Like Montgomery County, the other jurisdictions set different certification requirements and different maximum funding amounts for different offices. Second, the maximum contribution limit per donor in each jurisdiction is $250, except for Baltimore City, where it is $150 per donor. The $6,000 in parentheses shows the contribution limit in Maryland for traditionally funded candidates. To qualify to receive public funds, 5 of the 6 jurisdictions require an executive candidate to raise 500 contributions worth at least $40,000. Baltimore County is the exception, requiring candidates to raise 550 contributions worth at least $50,000. This column shows the maximum matching funds a candidate can get. An E next to the amount means per election. A candidate can receive up to the amount of matching funds for the primary election and again for the general election. Montgomery County's program works like that. EC means per election cycle. That is the total public funding a candidate can receive for both the primary and the general elections combined. You'll notice that Baltimore City's program differs in its funding structure. For some offices, in addition to receiving matching funds to match their contributions, candidates receive what is called a qualifying boost, a lump sum of money that a candidate receives when they become certified by the State Board of Elections to receive public funds. It is meant to give an infusion of funds to a campaign in its early stages. Baltimore County is the only jurisdiction that sets a maximum spending limit for a candidate in an election. For the executive, the maximum a candidate can spend is $1.4 million per election. And finally, only Montgomery County and Anne Arundel County do not let publicly funded candidates affiliate with other candidates. State law prohibits publicly funded candidates from being part of a slate where more than one candidate teams up for an election. State regulations, however, allow candidates to affiliate with other candidates, which lets candidates purchase joint campaign materials if each candidate pays for their respective portion. Montgomery and Anne Arundel's laws do not specifically state that publicly funded candidates can affiliate with other candidates. This table shows how much a candidate for executive would get in matching funds at different donation levels in the 6 Maryland jurisdictions. The 3 jurisdictions on the right, including Montgomery County, all use the same contribution matching formula that I talked about a few minutes ago. Although structured similarly, the matching ratios in Baltimore City, Howard County, and Prince George's County all differ from each other and from Montgomery County. What we found looking at matching funds from an executive candidate is that the amount of matching funds a Montgomery County candidate would get is between $25 and $75 less at some or all the contribution levels compared to the other 3 jurisdictions. The numbers in red show these higher amounts. OLO also analyzed public campaign finance programs in jurisdictions outside Maryland. We looked at the funding raising ability of publicly funded candidates compared to traditionally funded candidates. Specifically, we looked at how much money a traditionally funded candidate can raise for every dollar raised by a publicly funded candidate. What we found was that in most of the other jurisdictions, traditionally funded candidates can raise between $1 and $2 for every dollar raised by a publicly funded candidate. In Washington, D.C., traditionally funded candidates can raise about $10 for every dollar raised by a publicly funded candidate. In Montgomery County, traditionally funded candidates can raise $24 for every $1 raised by a publicly funded candidate. OLO had a few other findings that are related to our recommendations. The law requires the council to appoint a 7-member public election fund committee charged with estimating the resources necessary to fund the PEF and annually recommending to the council an appropriation amount. The committee is also charged with public outreach and education responsibilities. OLO found that no one has applied to serve in the committee since 2022, despite numerous attempts to advertise for members. Most importantly, OLO found that while the committee was active before the 2022 elections, neither the executive in his recommended budget nor the council in the adopted budget followed the committee recommendations regarding annual appropriations. Also, executive branch representatives identified two administrative components of the PEF law and regulations that need clarification. The first is that the language in the law about periodic adjustments of contribution and funding levels based on the changes in the Consumer Price Index need to be clarified. The second is the language in the county regulations regarding the scope of the audit requirement. And lastly, organizations and advocacy groups reported they had been told they cannot take actions to support a candidate because of the prohibition on candidates accepting donations from anyone other than an individual. And some supporting actions would be considered in-kind contributions under state law. Organizations reported a lack of clarity and understanding on how or why state and county law combine to prohibit what they considered typical activities to support a candidate. Which brings us to our recommendations. OLO has 5 recommendations. The first recommendation has changes to the PEF law. It recommends addressing the administrative CPI issue identified by executive branch staff, and it recommends that the council remove from the law the requirement to have a public election fund committee. Number 2 recommends asking the CE to amend the PEF regulations to clarify the audit requirement, also identified by executive branch staff. Number 3 recommends that the council review and potentially revise the maximum contribution limit for publicly funded candidates, given disparity in how much traditionally funded candidates in Montgomery County can raise compared to publicly funded candidates. $24 for every $1 raised by a publicly funded candidate. Number 4 recommends that the council discuss and consider whether the program attributes in other Maryland jurisdictions could enhance Montgomery County's program. Examples include the differences in funding ratios and the ability for candidates to affiliate with other candidates. Finally, OLO recommends that the council ask the State Board of Elections for clarification on how the boundaries in state and county law combine to impact outside organizations' campaign activities with respect to PEF candidates. And if interested, the council should also ask the State Board for input on what changes to county or state law would be needed to adjust the current dynamic. So thank you. This concludes the presentation, and we'll turn the discussion back to the committee chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFazio. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm incredibly impressed in how you were able to take this very long report with a lot of details and really do a great job of highlighting the main findings in less than 20 minutes. So we appreciate that. So we have time to discuss, and I will say this is a very, very detailed report. One of the things that I wanted to focus in on, if we could, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, is I think it's the first recommendation, if I can get back to the page, on the Public Election Fund Committee. Because I think for folks who are, viewing at home, if we could unpack that recommendation just a little bit more, because the idea of, we have a number of committees, boards, and commissions in the county. It's a way to have residents provide input and guidance on things we do at the county. And I know there was a good deal of detail in the report about what this committee has been tasked with and what they've actually done and who serves on it. And so maybe we can unpack that a little bit more before we take that up.
So I actually did a slide, let me see, that shows, okay, so this shows, I guess, the committee ever since its inception. This is from FY16 all the way through FY25. So you can see if you walk through it, the committee has made recommendations. There's been a majority, and sometimes there's been a dissent, but regardless of the majority or the dissent, the CE recommendation and the CC appropriation, or the final approved budget, they don't always follow those recommendations. And so then there's been an issue as well where there hasn't been really an interest in the committee. The council's advertised for the committee for the past, I guess, 4 years, and there hasn't been any interest in it. So, that's another issue. And I guess the way that could be done, like other council funds, or not council, county funds, is it could just be done with the CPI, and it could be on a rolling basis annually. So.
And just to clarify, the main point of this committee is to provide the recommendation on how much to put in the fund.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over to my colleagues now. No? Yep, you can go first. Councilmember Katz.
Well, thank you very much for the report, and I echo the Vice President's congratulations on being so succinct and being so helpful. All right, so the committee, and are we going to discuss everything, or we're going to go through each one as we each of the recommendations as we go through, or should I bring up all?
You can bring up all of them, and I think the balance we have is what's in the report, and then we'll probably come back to many of the recommendations that OLO made because they are reflected in the bill
Yes.
that we're talking to next. So I think clarifying points here on the research that was done to set up the conversation for the bill.
Thank you. So on this part, the suggestions from the committee on how much to set aside, I believe you're correct. That's what the wish list. The difficulty has always been on how much money we have. I mean, somebody can wish that we do this each year, and each year we say, look, we know we're going to need to get to X number, but we need to pay for all these other things while we're getting there. This one's probably a couple, 3 years away, so we'll add it next year. It's always, I guess they call that kick the can down the road. But that's what happened. So the committee has been helpful. And of course, when we first started this, I was here in the beginning as were others. The committee was needed because we had no idea how much we would actually need. We had no idea how many people would actually use it. So I'm fine not having the committee as such. Please remind me, do other jurisdictions have that only individuals can give money? How does that, is that a state law?
That is a state law.
That
That's
is a
correct.
state law.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that we should have, and part of the discussions, is that if two people want to combine their funds or combine their campaigns, that should be allowed. It's not like it's costing the county or the public election fund anything in addition if two people are affiliating. And in fact, it's in some cases they have one sign with a name, a couple names, or more than a couple names. I also believe we need to clarify if an outside organization will decide that they want to put somebody's name on their literature, that in some cases the candidate themselves don't even know they're doing it, and so I think we need to clarify that that's allowed, and that it's it'd be fine to do that. And I also think we need to keep in mind that we are seeing more and more self-funded candidates, and that has changed the tenor of the need of the amount of money that's needed. We're seeing more and more, and there was a time you never saw television ads in Montgomery County for local elections, and you're starting to see that more and more. So I think the whole idea, when this was first started, and just as an aside, I actually had a traditional account, and I froze that because when I first ran, you couldn't have public financing, and I froze that. And then I went to public financing, which was the first time you could have it. And then you had to give all that money back if anything was left. I mean, we weren't at that point not even allowed the $5,000 or whatever is allowed. So all that money went back. But I still had the the traditional finance, which I didn't use during that time. And now, this last election, I figured, you know what, I'm term limited. Why wouldn't I not use the traditional financing because I had that extra money? So I've lived both sides of it. I think that it's certainly a positive thing to have public financing, And I think we need to keep in mind that those who have used it have had success. And that was always a concern. If you're going against somebody who's going to spend, all this money, are you going to be able to be competitive? And we've proven that you can be from both sides. So all of that is on my list of things to discuss, and I have a feeling we'll get back to it. But thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I think, as was pointed out, some of the things that we may want to change with the campaign financing law is at the state level, and there are the things that we can do here, and I think that was very clear in the report. Mr. DeFazio, did you have anything you wanted to say before I move on? All right, I will turn to Council President Friedson and then Councilmember Glass.
I'll just briefly say it's a great report. I really appreciate the thoroughness of it. It goes into a lot of the regional comparison and really lays out a lot of the overarching questions, many of which have been discussed for a while. Appreciate the work of colleagues. Appreciate Councilmember Glass being here, and Vice President Stewart in particular, of really diving into these issues. And really, I think the substantive conversation related to this report is really focused on the bill. So we'll take that up. But I really appreciate Office of Legislative Oversight for all of the work and the succinctness of the summary, since it's a very detailed and in-depth report, but you were able to hit the keynote, so appreciate that.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate you and the committee members for making time today to talk about this. I know our schedules are all crunched as we're doing a lot of other things, and I appreciate OLO, your thoroughness in this report. We've gone through this topic for 2 cycles now, and I've never seen it so thoroughly analyzed. But I guess that's what time provides. And not only time, but the fact that Montgomery County has been a leader. We led the state in this regard. Other jurisdictions, other counties are following our lead. And it is a time for reflection to see how we're doing, how the original intent has kept up, and how other jurisdictions, not only in Maryland, but across the country, are trying to create more fair elections. And your report very succinctly does that. Even though the report is longer than the presentation, they both do an incredible job of providing that landscape analysis, quite frankly. The one thing that stands out to me in all of the pages of analysis is the fact that publicly financed candidates are at a financial disadvantage of 24 to 1. Mm-hmm. That is stark. And not only is that number stark on its own, but as you analyzed, we are an outlier. Can you talk a little bit more about that and about what you've seen, not only in other jurisdictions across the country?
Yeah, I guess in other jurisdictions, we definitely, in Maryland in general is an outlier because you have that $6,000. That's the maximum amount that you can do elsewhere. And you really don't have that in other states. And then as well as the ratios, like as I mentioned earlier, the ratios are all much lower than they are in general to our ratios in the county. So, yeah.
I appreciate you elevating that. And then to the point that the chair noted before about the committees, we have 90 plus boards, committees, and commissions here. I suspect that number will increase over time. And I absolutely understand why that was part of this law, right? When the law was created, a committee was created to ensure continuity of the program, fidelity of the program. And what has turned out is the elected officials and county government as a whole pledged itself to the program, so it did not necessarily need a group of residents to oversee it, without regard to the fact that residents didn't want to serve on the committee. An important asterisk to that. And so I think that is a fair point, astute observation, and we'll get to that in the legislation itself. But again, I want to commend you and Leslie for very thorough analysis that I know our colleagues in Annapolis will look at as well, because now that more jurisdictions in the state are, more counties are adopting and utilizing public financing, there are state laws, state changes that are required, and I think this will help provide a roadmap for that. So not only utilization in Rockville, but I suspect in Annapolis as well. So thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we have a representative from the county exec's office. I know you sent in a letter. I didn't know before we move on to the bill if you wanted to remark on anything. You're good? Perfect. All right. Mr. Fazio, I hope you stick around because I feel like discussion of the bill will lead back to the OLO report. So now we will turn to our discussion of Bill 20-24, the Public Campaign Financing Amendment. We have many co-leads on this bill. Moving forward, Councilmember Glass, myself, Councilmembers Fanny Gonzalez, Albanaz, Mink, Balcom, and Sales. First checking with my colleagues on the committee, do you have any opening remarks on this? Seeing none, I'll see if the main lead on the bill would like to say anything before I turn it over to Ms. Wellens.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate working with you and a number of our colleagues on this, which is something that has taken place basically every 4 years since this was adopted. And it is part of good government. It is part of self-reflection and wanting to make sure that the voice of our residents is ultimately heard. And so part of my comments were shared regarding the OLO report, and I'll expand more as we walk through the packet. So I yield back. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Ms. Wellens, I'll turn it over to you so you can help us walk through the packet.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, council members. The bill as introduced would accomplish three purposes. First, it would increase from 500,000 to 10,000, excuse me, 5,000 to 10,000. The amount of funds that a certified candidate may retain for certain post-election expenses. And then that amount would be increased every 4 years based upon an inflation index. Next, the bill, as originally introduced, attempted to clarify the calculation of the CPI, Consumer Price Index adjustment, that's under the existing law, but has been challenging for the Department of Finance to be able to administer due to some lack of clarity in the language. As you'll see later in the packet, even some further refinement is needed, as noted by the Department of Finance, which unsurprisingly is better at math than your drafting attorneys. So that's a preview. And then there are a couple of technical corrections throughout Chapter 16 throughout the public election law that the Office of Legislative Oversight in their thorough review, identified. So there's a little bit of a cleanup bill as well. There are a number of potential issues, potential amendments noted for your consideration. These relate both to recommendations that are contained in the OLO report, and in addition, some additional feedback from the Department of Finance, in particular about that CPI index and the language that should apply there. The first item noted for your consideration, and we're on page 3 of the staff memorandum, issue number 1, would be, and this is linked to the OLO recommendation of eliminating the PEF committee that might, due to the fact that it might no longer be needed after the law has been in effect, for 10 years, and also the lack of interest in participating in the board. So there's an amendment there for your consideration if you want to follow the OLO recommendation to eliminate the committee.
Great. I actually will see if Councilmember Katz would like to, since he teed this up earlier.
No, I'm in favor of that. I think that makes sense. As I say, we needed it when we needed it, and I think we've proven that at this point, we don't. Thanks.
Great. Council President Friedson, we're good with that? I'm also good with that recommendation to move that amendment forward.
Great, thank you. Moving to item number 2, this is on page 5 of the staff memorandum. This deals with individual donor contribution limits, and relates to the discussion that Mr. DeFazio you were having with him earlier about Montgomery County being an outlier nationally compared to other jurisdictions in the country where a candidate can raise more on a par, more on a one-to-one par with traditionally funded candidates, whereas here in Montgomery County, the publicly funded candidates can raise, the traditionally funded candidates can raise $24 for every $1 raised by the publicly funded candidate. In order to address that discrepancy, there is a potential amendment, and I will defer to the chair as it's her amendment, but it would essentially somewhat address that discrepancy by increasing the individual contribution limit from $250 as it is currently up to $500. And I also need to note, and apologies to the committee, I realized as I was reading through the law again yesterday that there are actually two places that I failed to include where there is a reference to the $250 that needs to be increased to $500. One is in section 16-20B, and the other one is in the definition section, the 16-18, the definition of eligible contribution. So I would suggest if you move forward with this amendment that those sections are included as well.
Great. Thank you. I think we already teed this up when we were doing the OLO report. Councilmember Natalie Fanning-Gonzalez and I moved this forward after reading the report to increase the maximum amount from $250 to $500. I want to note that our amendment would not change for this amendment, the maximum amount that is matched. That would stay at $150, and the maximum amount that any candidate could receive from public financing also would remain the same. What this amendment would do is increase the amount an individual contributor could give to a candidate to try and close that gap a bit of the 24-to-1 that was pointed out in the OLO report. I think this brings us in line with a number of other jurisdictions as well. So we are putting that forward for committee's consideration. Councilmember Katz?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that, but can you remind me, how much can an individual person, the candidate themselves, how much can they give for their own candidacy?
$12,000. I'm being
What is
informed
it?
by my friend.
You have an expert sitting right
know,
next to
I
you.
know.
The man has lived this.
Yeah.
Dave Crow from the Department of Finance. The candidate can lend $12,000 to their.
Is that just the candidate, and is that the candidate and their spouse?
And or their spouse.
I see. So it's the two people together could give the $12,000.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Hey, Council President Friedson, any objections or comments?
We'll just follow up on that. Just to clarify, since people are watching,
Yeah.
if the candidate does not have a spouse, an individual candidate could give $12,000,
Yes.
Correct.
and that was adjusted previously because we
Yes.
noted there are some candidates that don't have a spouse, and before it was $6,000 each, and that was not fair. So, yield back. Just want to make sure we clarified that.
Great.
Good point.
All right, Councilmember Glass?
I appreciate the chair and Councilmember Fanning-Gonzalez for putting this forward because, again, I think the most insightful data point from the OLO report is the 24-to-1 discrepancy, the disadvantage that individuals participating in public financing face. And what I appreciate about this amendment is that it tries to create more parity, still a 12-to-1 disadvantage, which is still an outlier. It is still a disadvantage compared to other jurisdictions, let's make that clear. But what this does is it tries to create some level of parity without any additional taxpayer revenue. It does not increase the cost of the program, and I think that is incredibly important to note. So, thank you.
All right, not seeing any objections from the committee, this amendment is accepted with the additional places in the bill.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Item number 3 for your consideration, and we're on page 6 of the staff memorandum, deals with the matching fund ratios that Mr. DeFazio explained earlier, and I believe that he even has some slides to show you how the potential amendment under this issue number 3 would apply. So, as noted previously by OLO, matching funds for candidates in Montgomery County are $25 to $75 less at every contribution level compared to Baltimore City, $25 to $50 less compared to Howard County at all contribution levels except $150, and $25 less compared to Prince George's County at the $25 and $75 contribution limits. The potential amendment would alter our county ratios at the first level so that it would be a 6 to 1 ratio. It would go from a 6 to 1 ratio to a 7 to 1 ratio for the county executive, and for council member candidates, it would go from a 4 to 1 ratio to a 5 to 1 ratio. And again, Mr. DeFazio has some fancy charts to show how this would.
Yes, we appreciate the charts, because this is a place where it can
life.
get a little confusing.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Mr. DeFazio?
So first I'm going to show you on the chart here, this is going to be for the county executive. So this is when we change it from 6 to 1 to 7 to 1. So if you look, fourth column over for Montgomery County, that's what we have right now. And then if you look to the right of that, this is the new. So that's what it's going to look like once if we do this this bill amendment. As again, it's progressive. So as you can see, it's only going to affect the 50. It's going to be the first 50, correct? So then it's going to flow all the way down to the end, and it'll be 650 more. And you can see compared to the other jurisdictions, now we bring it up, because before, where all these ones were blue, we were behind them. And there's only, I guess the only two that are above us now are Baltimore City at $25 and at $75. And so that's for the county executive. And for the county council, similar effect. Again, it's gonna pass all the way through. Montgomery County there is in the black, and then the new one is in the blue. And we're brought up right with Howard, except Prince George's is still from like 25 through 125. They are still higher, but then we match up with them at 150. So definitely more comparable across the board.
Great. Thank you. And again, this was an amendment brought forward by myself and Councilmember Natalie Fani-Gonzalez after we read the OLO report. And I think the important piece here and what we were really looking at was keeping the emphasis on our small dollar donors. And as was shown in the report, that actually is for the public financing candidates a large part of who is donating to them and source of their funding. So I don't know, Mr. DeFazio, if you wanted to elevate that piece as well.
Yeah, so I'd like to actually take it one step further. So if we combine this with the increase, the 250 to 500, now we'll take a look at how much the individual with the matching funds compares to the new to the old. So as you see right here, the current PAF program, the initial 150, that's going to be the same with the bill. The additional unmatched, so now that's going to change, because previously the limit was 250, now it's 500. It goes up to 350. And then the matched funds for the current PAF program, again, there's 600 now for the maximum. They go up to 650. So overall, you went from $850, the maximum you can get out of the individual, with the matched funds and the contributions all the way up to $1,150. So that puts us more on par, and this is similar. That's the county executive, and you'll see the same for the county council, the $300 difference.
Great. Any more slides?
That's it.
All right. Awesome.
Unless you want some.
No. I think you've done quite a few slides on this topic. And again, this is to the main goal here is to help those who get the public financing to be more in line to the traditional candidates in what they're able to raise. I think it's a modest increase and also brings us in line with surrounding jurisdictions. Do my colleagues have any?
I'm good.
We're good. All right. We will take yes as an answer. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. DeFazio, could you go back one slide or two? I just want to accentuate the point. So the changes that are being made are at the $25 level? Can just...
It's at the $50 level. So the only reason we have 25 is because Baltimore City, They do it at the 25 level, so that's why we kind of want to do a like comparison. But we do everything. We start at the 50.
So within this entire chart
yeah.
and within the regiment, the $1 to $50 donation gets from a 6 to a 7. From a 4 to a 5.
Yep, that's correct.
Multiplier, and that's the only change.
Exactly. Then it flows through because it's progressive.
Okay, and Madam Chair, as you noted, that was specifically designed to accentuate even further the smallest of small dollar. Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, the committee accepted this amendment, so we can move forward.
Great, thank you. At the bottom of page 7 of the staff memorandum, issue number 4, there is a potential amendment related to candidate affiliation. And this amendment would, like some other jurisdictions in Maryland, allow some limited affiliation between candidates who are publicly funded to affiliate with any other candidate, including non-publicly financed candidates, on certain campaign material. And there are restrictions involved. This is specifically enabled by state regulations under the Code of Maryland regulations. So the amendment would simply follow along those state regulations and bring that ability to do this limited affiliation to Montgomery County, Howard County, and Baltimore City, and Prince George's County, and Baltimore County all explicitly allow candidates to affiliate in this manner already.
Great. Again, this is an amendment myself and Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez brought forward after reading the report. And also, this is something that, as Mr. DeFazio said, from the stakeholder interviews, and I think many of us who are on this committee have heard from folks who have been involved in recent campaigns, the rules around what you can do and can't do with other candidates when you're a publicly financed candidate have been confusing for people here in Montgomery County, because we are actually different than other neighboring jurisdictions. And then there are also pieces of this, as Ms. Wellen said, that are part of state law. So this is actually following along with what state law does. It follows along with our neighboring jurisdictions do. This would not allow a slate, because that is something we can't do according to state law. But what this does allow is publicly financed candidates to affiliate with other candidates, whether or not they're traditionally financed or publicly financed, and we would have to follow, in this case, all the different rules and everything about notification, authority line, and everything else. So that is the amendment on the table. Any comments or questions? Councilmember Katz.
And I'm fine with this, but is there a dollar amount if the traditionally financed candidate is putting in $10,000 for this mailer or whatever they're doing? Does it say that the public finance candidate has to have an equal amount of money in? How does that work?
It does say, so the language says that it's permitted if the authorized campaign finance entity makes a direct disbursement to the payee for its share of the cost of the campaign materials. So this would be a question of interpretation ultimately, for the state board really, but my interpretation of that is you have to pay your share. You can't pay, 50 cents and pretend that would be
Well, and that's
adequate.
only my concern is that if somebody who's a publicly financed candidate didn't have the funds in their account and they turn to a traditionally financed and say, look, I know you've gotten $6,000 from somebody and I need some help here. Can we get together? I have no problem as long as it's clear that everybody has to be putting in literally their fair share as to what they're doing.
Yeah,
Thanks.
to interpret it otherwise would basically mean, be a contribution from the traditionally funded candidate to the publicly funded one. So, I'm confident that that's the interpretation and that the language covers it. I would hesitate to move away from the specific language since it is a repeat of what is in the Code of Maryland regulations.
Council President Friedson?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify that point. its share assumes proportionate share. And this is important because it has come up from time to time. And ultimately, anything that is beyond a reasonable share would be a prohibited contribution because it's a campaign committee. It's essentially a political action committee, a candidate committee, and it would be a prohibited campaign contribution. So it should be covered in that sense, and so I think it's an important point, but it does seem like it's covered and also allows for doing an advertisement in a book and having multiple candidates, split an advertisement, which happens all the time, for instance. And as long as you're, paying a proportionate share, it's an advertising expense. It's not a campaign contribution and should be treated as such.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you for this discussion. So the whole purpose here is to create parity as much as we can. Does current law allow a candidate using traditional financing to include the names of any other candidates or elected officials that they may want, without it being deemed what's the term that we're using here? Technically, it's not slating because that has a very technical definition, but affiliating.
Right. So there's still, it's a little bit complex because on the one hand, the entity, the traditionally funded, has the ability through the First Amendment to say, I really like candidate X, and I'm not prevented from saying that or putting that on my literature just because candidate X is publicly financed. But then the problem is that the state law does prohibit any coordination between the traditionally funded entity and the publicly funded one on, like the advertisement, for example. And so therefore, that's very limiting because, I think the presumption is also, well, of course, there must have been some kind of level of coordination. But I think this is also an area which, quite frankly, can get nuanced enough that, consultation with the state board and or, election attorneys in a more private capacity can sometimes be needed.
I think there is a gray zone that remains even if this is passed, because my understanding would be that a traditionally financed candidate can say almost whatever they want and include whomever they want, and not be coordinated in any way. It is First Amendment, and assuming it is a true statement, right? Which in politics at the national level right now, I digress. So, so I think that does already exist. And if this is an attempt to try and create more parity, which is, again, the purpose of this legislation, then I think it would be a move in the right direction. Thank you.
Great. All right. So that amendment moves forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bottom of page 8, you'll see the next item, which should be numbered 4B or 5. There were 2 4s, so apologies. So this deals with the calculation of the consumer price index adjustments that occur periodically every 4 years. And I will not delve into the specifics of the language except to say that OLO and Finance and I and the Office of the County Attorney coordinated to make sure that the language would be clear, so that there would be a CPI adjustment every 4 years, that the Department of Finance is able to interpret adequately and is able to apply in a consistent manner. And I'd certainly invite Mr. Crow, if that's okay with the chair, to elaborate in any way that
Mr.
you
Crow?
feel appropriate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to apologize. My colleagues in finance do the calculation, and they know a lot more about it. But the issue that arose was with the adjustment proposed to do on July 1st of 2025, because that would be less than the a 4-year cycle to July 1st of 2028. So, for example, July 1st, 2025 adjustment will cover years 21, 22, 23, and 2024. If the wording is not changed, then 2028 adjustment will include 2024, 2025, 26, and 2027. And this will overstate the increase for July 2028, especially if there was a high 2024 inflationary year. So that, it was, until we added the July 1st of 2025, the language was accurate. It
Yeah.
could be calculated without the double count.
And this is actually, and I think that those comments are pertinent to the next issue on page 9, because there's an additional CPI potential amendment that deals with the dates. This initial one on page 8 is just to clear up how finance will be calculated. And this will not give you a sufficient explanation, but kind of my understanding of where the language went wrong before is kind of an assumption that we all have, that the CPI is just a straight percentage, whereas technically it's actually a flat number, and you have to take that into account when you're drafting the language for how to calculate the adjustment.
Great, so there's two things. So I think Council President Friedson had a question. Is it on the bottom of page 8 or what's on page 9? If we take them, or page 9. So first, let's look at the bottom of page 8 and the adjusted language. Are there any questions on
Just to
that?
clarify the process.
Yeah. So I think that's fine, what's on the bottom of page 8. So let's go then to the timing, because I think there's a question there, and I'll turn it over to Council President Friedson.
Well, I think you're just raising the issue of the time. I mean, generally we'd be setting, if we put aside this particular issue, we'd be setting the current rate now for moving forward, and then there'd be an adjustment process for when it gets recalculated. The question we have now is we're setting a new rate, we're adjusting up, then we're doing a CPI for a period that part of a period we already know now, and then setting a process to have this be a regular process every 4 years moving forward. The question, I think, for the committee and ultimately for the council is whether we set the rate now and then set up a new 4-year process for moving forward at a time that makes sense. We fixed the timing problem in the last discussion, and the question of whether or not you set the rate today and then have a 4-year process that begins at a date certain that makes sense to avoid the double counting. I think that's the question that's before us, and I just think that we should clarify that and decide it and move forward.
Okay. Mr. Crowe, did you have any comment?
I agree. If we set the rate today separate from adding that language in there, it would be fine. It was just adding that extra, because the definition in section 4 or 4B is where the issue comes, because it says to calculate the previous 4, and since we added in that extra catch-up period, that's where there's a little bit of a conflict.
And so, and just to provide the committee and public with a little more context, this potential amendment does relate to an OLO recommendation, which was to, since there have not been CPI adjustments to date under the law, to do one right away after this new law goes into effect, and then start kind of with the every 4-year cycle. And to the council president's point and Mr. Crowe's point, there is the finance department does have some additional language that, should you want to make sure that 2024 is not double counted, finance does have some language that could address that if the committee would like to, and happy to read it into the record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why don't we do that, Ms. Mullins? Because I think, the timing of all this, we had some great recommendations from OLO, and we took some of them. And so that changes then, I think, because we did the other amendments and took those suggestions. Now that we get back to the timing of the adjustments for the CPI, we need to revisit that. So if you want to read the language from finance.
Yes, let me just read how the entire paragraph 3, going back to, okay, great, thank you. Thank you. So let me read how the entire paragraph would read regarding how the CPI adjustment is done. Okay, the adjusted limit must be equal to the current limit multiplied by the outcome of the most recent published consumer price index at the time of the adjustment, divided by the annual value of the consumer price index from 4 calendar years prior to the current year, comma, this is the additional language, or divided by the annual value of the consumer price index from the calendar year of the most recent adjustment, whichever calendar year is greater. Crystal clear. I think the most important thing is that it's clear to finance who has to administer.
Clear to somebody, not to me, but yeah.
Yeah, Council President Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate the effort. I think it adds confusion. It doesn't remove confusion. There is a question here of if the body was keeping the numbers the same, making sure that CPI was calculated in an appropriate and reasonable way. If we're resetting a number as part of this bill for the purpose of implementing it for this election cycle, we should reset the number at an appropriate number and then have the CPI for the future. I think the challenge that we have now is we are stuck trying to do both because we're responding to an OLO report, which was referring to the existing, and trying to square the round peg, so to speak, for a bill where we're already making changes. I think ultimately we should choose, make a decision, and make it as clean as possible, because I do think that the trying to do both at the same time is going to add more confusion and creates this double counting challenge, because ultimately we are making the adjustments today as part of this bill that will ultimately be approved by the council, I suspect, and support. And we're setting the number, which is essentially the number for this cycle.
So if I can suggest, given that there is agreement to reset the number, and we took care of that we asked before this comes before the full council, that we work on any language now that needs to look at the CPI adjustment for the future. Because I still think, if I'm correct, Mr. DeFazio, in the OLO report, the language around CPI, even regardless of whether or not we do the reset, is problematic. And we would have to come back to this then, or a future council would. And so I think knowing that we're going to move forward, or at least the recommendation of this committee is to move forward with the reset on the numbers, let's just take the time before it comes to full council to make sure we get the language on the CPI and the dates of that correct, understanding that the committee's recommendation is not to double count and do an increase twice.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We good? All right.
Mm-hmm.
We're good on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes all the items that staff had wanted to bring to your attention.
Great. Mr. DeFazio or Mr. Crowe, are there any other outstanding items you would like the committee to take up on this? No? Okay. Councilmember Glass, since you're the main lead on this, anything else you would like the committee to consider before we move forward?
I appreciate the committee's really thoughtful conversation, and clearly staff from here at the council and across the street. And as it relates to the discussion point we just talked about regarding CPI, I think the decision was the correct one, because I want to continue centering us on the point of this bill, and it is to create as much parity and as much fairness in our elections as possible. And there were a number of amendments that were adopted that bring us closer to parity, from going from a 24-to-1 disparity to a 12-to-1. Still an outlier, full stop, but it's better. And I appreciate the committee's support for free and fair elections. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Seeing nothing else, the recommendation from the Government Operations Fiscal Policy Committee will be favorable towards this bill with the amendments and one item to discuss at full council. All right, thank you very much for your time today. We are adjourned for our morning session. come back after lunch, and we will be talking to TEBS and about cable funds and land distributions and so much fun on a Halloween day. So thank you all. We are adjourned.